Seems fair to me. Fair decision.
Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, thank you for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Lots of topics to kick around. Let's meet our panelists, starting with KSDK's Christine Byers, who's returning. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Charlie.
Her former colleague at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, one of our founders, Mr. Bill McClellan. Another founder, now with KTRS as well as the Riverfront Times, Ray Hartmann. And Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American, AM 590 and 97.1 FM News Talk. Well, we have really lost some great St. Louisans the last couple of weeks. We talked about Lou Brock last week. We did not mention Jack Martirelli from Guns and Poses. Lost him, as well as former license collector Thomas Nash, former alderman and brewery executive Wayman Smith, the founder of Drury Hotels, Charles L. Drury, and Ray Hartmann, a real giant in St. Louis, William Danforth, the longtime chancellor of Washington University. Tell us a few things about Chancellor Danforth, Ray.
Well, I had the honor, and it was an honor to know him. He was one of the absolute great St. Louisans of all time, not only for his philanthropy and obviously his accomplishment at WashU, but he was a great idea person. Just yesterday, it was kind of ironic, on the day he died, BioSTL, which he had the inspiration for, got a $1.5 million grant from the federal government, largest one they ever got. And he'll be remembered as, I don't think there's anybody that ever did more for this community than William Danforth. And the only person who would want to not be said William Danforth, because he was so self-effacing. Really a wonderful man.
Well, let me say a word about Wayman Smith. I mean, he was one of those larger-than-life characters when I got here in 1980. And he was on the board of aldermen, and he worked for the brewery back when working for the brewery really meant something, when the brewery was the entity in St. Louis. Wayman, and he was on the police board. He was the commissioner of the police board. Wayman Smith was just in the middle of everything.
Absolutely, Bill. And I got to know Wayman, especially during my earliest years at St. Louis American, beginning in 1992. And 1996, I'm sorry. And listen, there was not a major Black conference, convention, organization that did not come to St. Louis. And it wasn't just because Anheuser-Busch would be a major sponsor. It was because Wayman Smith recruited them to come to St. Louis and give St. Louis a chance. And he was an invaluable asset, and he will be missed.
Christine?
And speaking of, capturing or having the ability to rally the troops, so to speak, and really do a lot for the community, Jack Martirelli, he helped found Guns and Hoses 30 plus years ago, and he was able to recruit business leaders and such to participate and sponsor the event.
Got to say a word, too, about Tom Nash, a license collector, and many other positions in local government, and was very involved in charities as well. And Charles Drury, who founded the Drury Hotels, which has won more J.D. Power Awards than any other hotel chain. You can throw in Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton. Right here, based in St. Louis, Drury Hotels. And, we've lost some real giants these past couple of weeks. So our thoughts and prayers with their families as we move on to our first topic for the day. Christine Byers, it turns out that the governor's special session went 2 for 7. There were a couple of items, including residency and a victim witness protection program measure that did pass. But by and large, a lot of people think that this special session in Jefferson City, which was intended to thwart crime in St. Louis, was not that successful. How do you see it?
Well, one of the issues that did not pass was the issue of what's called concurrent jurisdiction, which basically would have given the Attorney General, Eric Schmidt, some jurisdiction over prosecuting homicide cases after a period of 90 days if Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner did not bring charges in those cases. But the Missouri Prosecutors Association, led by Republican Tim Lomar, staunchly opposed the measure, saying, it's basically a slippery slope when you start taking away power from locally elected prosecutors. What's next? And so they really fought against it, and it did not pass.
And I'll just jump in. I think that's a shame. Ray, I know you're going to disagree. In fact, everyone will. You know, last week we had Heather Taylor on from the Ethical Society of Police, and she said that she had some great homicide cases that she presented to the prosecutor's office, and the assistant circuit attorneys did not follow up. I think if that is the case, after 90 days, why not give the paperwork to Eric Schmidt?
I'll tell you why not, because Kim Gardner got elected by the largest vote margin since George Peach in the early 80s. She's elected prosecutor of the city of St. Louis. This was a disaster for Parson in the sense that he basically, I say it's a disaster. Politically, he's probably fine with it. But if he can't manage his big priorities with 71% of the House and 71% of the Senate, how can he govern the state? I mean, and then he says, well, there was one victory for St. Louis residency, which was basically to impose the state's will on a matter that's on the city ballot. And then he said the other one was the Victims Fund for Kansas City. And it's like, what about the victims in St. Louis? And by the way, they forgot to fund the Victims Fund. So they haven't done that. It was a disaster. And it was just, and good for Tim Lomar, by the way. He really had a great victory. Christine's right.
You know, if the governor or the legislature really wanted to help St. Louis, they would get the gun laws back to where they used to be, where, you know, the city could have its own gun laws. Because in the old days, if the police stopped the car and there were guns in the car, they could confiscate the guns. And the legislature made it so that you don't even need a concealed carry permit. So this is all just posturing when the governor says he wants to do something for crime in St. Louis.
Congress, not Lacey, but his father, when Bill Clinton was elected in 1992, and I was in Washington, D.C., and I saw him. And you know, everybody's happy if you're Democratic, and you had the Senate, the House, and the Oval Office. And he said, sometimes it's harder to get it done without another faction working against you. So, you know, I'm not giving the governor a pass because that is ridiculous. But he had some bad ideas, and the joint jurisdiction was just a bad idea. So I see why it went down in flames.
I don't think it was a bad idea, nor was the idea to get money for the witnesses. We had that guest last week, Heather Taylor. Did you not listen? She said that the witnesses are being executed in the city. Why that's not front page above the fold, I don't know. Again,
actually, wait,
the police officer
Charlie,
saying
that
the witnesses are being executed in the city of St. Louis.
Wait, Charlie. I'm not, you know, disparaging our guest, but that would be one. Okay, who got executed? Where? What time? What was their name? You just asked it. Why is that?
Follow up on that. But
wait, hold on. We have a newspaper that does an excellent job. I suppose you work at a radio station that does an excellent job. Those are questions that could be easily answered. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm saying that there were a couple of statements in there, and I said, I would like to see the factual proof of that.
Fair.
I remember a couple cases where people were killed right before they would have to testify. And, you know, I think that Sergeant Taylor was speaking of a general attitude of fear, you know, more than every single time somebody gets killed. That's
what I agree with. I agree with that, Bill.
Nonetheless, the governor has his heart in the right direction. I agree. Our gun laws should be stricter, and you should have to get a permit and a background check to carry a firearm in the city. That's clear. But we had more crimes against people, violent crimes, in June than the previous 8 Junes combined. August was the third worst on record. And how many police officers have been shot at this year, Christine?
41.
40 in the city of St. Louis alone.
You know what? Every one of those was with a gun, Charlie. If Mike Parson gave a hoot about St. Louis, he'd be doing something about that. Bill's absolutely right. This is all politics, and it's just, you know, we also stop worrying all of a sudden about the systemic problems in the police department and all the other stuff that we were talking about right after George George Floyd.
Because they pale in comparison. Right now, we have more people dead in St. Louis from homicide than COVID-19 in 2020.
They had 3 months. Okay, they went down there at least 3 times. They put the legislators at risk. They spent all this money. All they have to show for it is the residency that's on the ballot. And the one good thing they did, the Victims Fund, they didn't fund it. And so, I mean, it was a disaster.
It wasn't his best day. I admit that. Hey, however, let's move on to St. Charles. And I don't know, Bill, I've never seen anything quite like this. I can't defend it. The poll workers in St. Charles got a memo from one of the election officials that they don't have to wear the masks, but if somebody voting in St. Charles on the first Tuesday in November says, hey, wear your mask, according to the memo, the worker is supposed to feign surprise, dig in the pocket for a mask, and then put it on. What the heck?
I thought it was wonderful, and I wish they would do it in St. Louis County. I mean, it just sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit. You'd walk in to a vote and you go, hey, how come you're not wearing a mask? Oh, I don't have one on. And then they put one on. And meanwhile, the person sitting next to them doesn't have a mask. And somebody say, how come you know? Oh, I don't have one on either. It just sounds like fun. I mean, I've registered to vote by mail, absentee, because of my age and I got medical issues. But if St. Louis County would have this, I'd go in and vote myself just for the fun of it. I mean, I think anything you can do to make voting fun sounds like a good idea. And so I applaud the St. Charles County guy who came up with this idea of act surprised. Masks? Oh my gosh, I'm not wearing one. I think it's great.
Bill, it's fun to listen to your shtick about this, but, and I'm not going to be one of these humorless liberals, but the president's top health official just yesterday or the day before said masks were more important than the vaccine in fighting COVID-19. And what's not fun about this particular story is that we've got this ridiculous politicization of the mask, which should be kind of 101. And I'm not, again, I think your part's funny, but masks are a serious thing. And this is a Republican county, and they're making a little statement, and it will have the effect. I think one of the things they want to do is that people who would care about masks, when they hear something like that, are less likely to show up at the polls because they're like, don't want to die voting.
Okay, Alvin, I want to ask you, speaking of masks and other things, we may have touched upon it briefly last week that now at Mizzou, students, even when walking alone on campus, have to wear a mask. That might also be the rule at WashU. I'm not entirely sure. It could be. But the head of the school there, Mun Choi, the chancellor, recently blocked, then unblocked some of the critical students and faculty on Twitter, people who were disagreeing with him, sometimes profanely. And so he reversed that. But now some people are saying, you know what? Mizzou just doesn't have its act together when it comes to preventing the spread of COVID-19. Your daughter's there. Enlighten us.
Well, and she literally is one of the students. Boy, she just wants to get through the entire semester. And, she sees what's going on around her. And they're kind of upset by it because it seems like they're in the minority. And they may not be. But it's like just on the campus and around it. And, some of it is youth. Some of it is political. Some of it is that the university should have tested everybody the second that he stepped on campus when the semester was about to begin. And they did, I guess 2 students have been expelled because they had tested positive and were still just going about their business, exposing all kinds of other people. So and as for what happens to you become president of the University of Missouri or the chancellor of the system, whatever, and you just lose your mind? Is that ivory tower that tall? I mean, I don't understand that. You should be willing to talk to anybody about anything. That's the position that you're in.
One thing I know, Ray, you wrote a wonderful column about this that I direct our viewers to the Riverfront Times, but I did notice that one of the students used really bad language when addressing President Choi. So I think that if somebody is vulgar or profane, you can block them.
No, I agree with that. I just unilaterally, no. But, if somebody's just like that, well, yes.
Well,
Yes,
I
I
don't.
know.
You know what? I don't think you're right legally if your president of the university or chancellor has a Twitter account that you can do that. But you know what? I don't even care about that. What I do care is what Alvin was talking about, and that is that I'm proud of the Maneater. I worked there a long time, and they are the grown-ups in the room. They're the ones with gravitas. They were called. Can you imagine? I mean, it's like it's just unbelievable. I said in my comments, cats chasing dogs. It's like they are criticizing the university for not enforcing discipline on the frat houses and sororities, for violating social distancing. They are the ones criticizing the lack of testing and and talked about how disorganized it was. And to Alvin's point, I mean, these kids, the kids are like, I think we'd be better off with them running the show than the administration. The administration, as I say, they're just making it worse. You understand the thing about Twitter is the one people are talking about. He made these ridiculous statements to the faculty about loyalty to him, to his staff.
Yeah.
Just this week, the Maneater broke another story where they were just basically telling the staff, if you don't like it, shut up. I mean, it's just, but the real issue is COVID, and they should be doing a lot more testing and protecting the kids.
Yeah, to get on campus, there should be testing. I agree with that. And I think that there are a lot of kids around the country, like your daughter, Alvin, who are enforcing it. My son goes to the University of Virginia, as it turns out, and some people have complained that the kids are turning in their colleagues too often. It's like the Stasi in East Germany. And but they have this honor code, and now kids are just hunkering down in their bedrooms, afraid of being outed. And so my son wants to take up the ukulele, and I'm thinking, wow, what kind of a college experience is that, to teach yourself the ukulele in your bedroom alone? But that's where we are during the pandemic. Okay.
It doesn't seem right to me that the kids are kind of policing themselves. I mean, I thought that kids are supposed to be a little wild, and there's a time and place for everything, and it's called college. And I don't know whether to be impressed or disturbed by the fact that the kids seem, as Ray said, so much more mature, and it's like Animal House on its side.
Right.
I mean, I don't know whether it's good or not.
By the way, I was at the University of Kansas this past weekend, and going by the stadium, there was a party on a porch in the front yard. There had to be 300 kids. Nobody had masks on. I didn't want to be that guy and stop and take a video of it, and so I didn't. But yeah, 1100 block of Mississippi, Lawrence, Kansas, last Saturday night.
It's happening everywhere. We know that. Well, Ray, what about a protest outside? Ray, what do you think about a protest outside the county executive's home, rather? Protesters who are concerned that the restrictions on youth sports are just too strict in St. Louis County, went outside Sam Page's home, just like some protesters have been doing their thing outside Lyda Crusen's home, forcing her to move out. What do you think about that?
Well, I think they should have been playing the ukulele if they were out there. But
it's sad. It's a sad thing. It's a college experience. But go ahead.
Stop bashing the ukulele. No, I think I said last week I wasn't a fan of the protesters going to Lyda's house. I'm not a fan of this. I don't like the idea of protesters going to people's homes. I didn't like it when people were being doxxed and they were all upset that their addresses out there. I think public officials, it's hard enough to get good public officials rather than attack them at their homes. I will say this, I maybe previewing my column here, but if you transpose those two demonstrations, if you had these folks marching, and by the way, Lyda Crusen City has stricter regulations about sports than the county does. If these folks had been marching instead of Black Lives Matter, the McCoskies would have been serving them refreshments on the front lawn.
Give me a break.
They would. And conversely, if Black Lives Matter was marching in the suburbs, they'd be on Donald Trump's Twitter account for invading the suburbs. So, I mean, there's a lot of double standards going on here, but we ought to not be going to people's homes, I don't think.
Go ahead, Charlie. No, I was going to say, I would tend to agree. But don't go to people's houses. There's plenty of places. And my whole thing about this, let these kids play. Jefferson County, Herculaneum, they're about ready to have to shut the school down because the people on the football team were positive, and then we're all around the other students. It's going on all over America. In fact, if you Google Jefferson County football coronavirus, another county in Florida, Jefferson County in Florida, is going through the same thing. So, people, like I say, want to be Vince Lombardi's, and my son is going to be Joe DiMaggio unless you don't let him play 9-year-old baseball this summer. Give it a break, people. Please, just give it a break.
Well,
on the other hand, Alvin, if, the Big Ten, which is a very prestigious Northwestern, Illinois, Michigan, they've just decided they're going to play football. So if I were a parent in St. Louis County and I said, well, these people know so much and they're going to play football, I mean, I don't see why we can't.
Well, there's a big reason. I mean, testing, the situation that the players will be in as of, they're not like leaving practice and going home or going to church or going to wherever. Well, they could be going to church, but they're going back to a dorm, which is supposedly going to be bubble-like. They're going to get tested every day. There's a big difference in, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12 conference, but that being said, I'm still not convinced that Big Ten and SEC, Big 12, all of them, I'm not convinced that they should be playing.
Well, you went to the game last weekend. I'm sorry, go ahead, Christine.
I said I'm not convinced. I didn't say I wouldn't go.
I think some of the reason why you see so much passion among these parents and these kids is that for some of these kids, this is their only shot at a scholarship, is to play.
I think there's that, and also I think it's good to combat depression and other issues by staying active. And we don't have in the city, and I don't think in the county, a single death among people under the age of 40, and we're already 6 months into the pandemic. So if that's the case, why not let the kids play soccer or football, like my high school is in Cleveland, by the way. Ohio rules are very loose, as it turns out. And then make sure that the people with comorbidities, those with hypertension, obesity, diabetes, stay away from those people.
In fairness, there is a little thing you're leaving out, which is that the rate of infection for 15 to 19-year-olds is 10 times 10 to 14-year-olds. Right now, and I had Spring Schmidt, the co-director of the health department, on last night talking about this, and a pediatrician, Ken Haller, earlier in the week. They all say the same thing. There is an alarming spike of 15 to 19-year-old COVID cases in the St. Louis area. And to take that out of the equation and act like, well, we'll just, and I understand what Christine's saying, because there are a lot of people that are concerned. Well, we don't hear from are the parents on those teams that don't want their kids exposed, because they're not going to be out protesting. And we can talk, if there's 30 or 40 kids on a high school football team, there might be 10 or 15 out there wanting their kids to play. And what are the other ones supposed to do if they're worried about their child's safety?
Well, then they don't play.
Well, you just tell your child not to play. I mean, I loved high school sports watching it. I had 8 consecutive years of it, 4 with my daughter, 4 with my son, and neither of my kids were headed toward a scholarship. But it was just fun, and as for a parent. So
Charlie, just real quick, Charlie. Nobody died is not a very good argument for anything.
I think it is the argument.
Okay.
They're not shut. Like my son runs cross country, and he's running today. The point is, I'm not.
Well, you're like Alvin going to KU. What are you doing?
Wait, I wasn't around anybody. I know, but
you're both tacitly endorsing sports.
No one's not endorsing sports, Charlie.
No, I'm not. If they said there was, hey, Alvin, we're not playing. Okay, we're not playing.
Well,
Alvin's on the record that he did not stop at that party.
I did not stop. I slowed down.
But hey, now what is it? Can you have sports or not? I mean, what's the rule?
There's not all the same in football. You got linemen that are literally spitting at each other every play. There's a different there's different variables, and they have them categorized. They're not banning all sports for all kids. They're trying to hold back, and they have different rules under 14. They are trying to find, and look, it's a moving target. I'm not defending them necessarily, other than to say it's easy for us to sit here and for parents to second guess them. Mm-hmm. They're trying to watch the numbers, and they're trying to categorize the sports in a way that they're making the right decision on a case-by-case basis. And I don't think you can criticize them for that.
Well, Christine Byers, I want to ask you about a topic that we kind of hit on, but maybe not right down the middle, and that is we had another police officer shot this past week, and if you include Captain Dave Doran, that's 10 for the year, which is completely off the charts. You already said that 41 officers in the city have been shot at in the year 2020. What are the police officers saying to you? Do they have recommendations for how we might make this a safer job for the uniformed officers in the city of St. Louis?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of topics that I'm hearing from officers that I talk to. One of which, on tonight's newscast, there will be an interview that I did with the officer who was shot on Sunday. His mother talked about what that experience was like and how she thinks officers are handling all of the violence right now going on. And there's a couple of issues. I mean, one is, the Republican-led legislature in Missouri, as we talked earlier, really relaxed gun laws in this state. And former Chief Sam Dotson would talk about this issue so much that sometimes I would roll my eyes because I knew it was coming every time I'd have a conversation with him about rising crime, a couple of years ago. And now the battle cry is focused on the prosecuting attorney's office and also the issue of residency and recruitment and the exclusion list. So I think there's a multitude of issues that are certainly on the minds of officers when it comes to what is going on, what's driving the violence, what can be done, what are the issues that can be addressed to slow the violence involving police officers. But it's certainly not just one thing or another. So, I mean, it's a multi-layered issue for the officers that I speak to.
It's a great irony because if only police officers voted on gun control laws, they would all pass. And it's just that why doesn't sections of Missouri and sections of the United States listen to police officers when it comes to guns? I just don't understand it.
I mean, it's interesting because I think the phrase gun control is really what like immediately puts some people off, when in actuality, the conversation about gun control in Missouri has been, right now, if there's a felon in possession of a weapon driving around the city of St. Louis, the police officers can't charge him with felon in possession. It's not a state crime. So that was part of the announcement that Eric Schmidt made last week about the Safer Streets initiative, and him basically cross-deputizing his prosecutors to work with federal prosecutors because that's still a federal law violation.
Wow. Guys, Christine, I hate to cut you off there, but I know we can get more information by visiting ksdk.com, right? And we'll see that report. Meanwhile, we're going to take a break here, but then come back and switch gears somewhat when Kristen Wild joins us. She's the executive director of Operation Food Search. So we thank you for joining us. We'll be right back.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for the second half of Donnybrook, and we are so glad here at the 9 Network to welcome Kristen Wild, the Executive Director of Operation Food Search, making her debut on this broadcast. Thanks, Ms. Wild, for joining us. How are you?
Great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
How are things when it comes to hunger in the 14 to 16 county region that we call St. Louis?
Not quite as great as I'm feeling. Hunger has increased in the region since the pandemic began. And it wasn't, food insecurity was already at a pretty high rate at about 14.5% in the St. Louis region. And it is now at a rate of about 19.6%. So we've seen, 37% increase in food insecurity in just these past 6 months.
Alvin?
So how do you find, and I guess this is part of your mission, how do you find who needs what? And it just like, is it by, they can, come to you? And I know like our church where I go had, a food drive where cars could come through. And whenever people have those, they're highly, highly, sought after. Dozens and dozens of cars. It goes on for hours. So how do you find the people that need the food and then find the food that to try to get to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And definitely there's a lot of work involved on both of those avenues. As far as finding the people, we work with about 200 community food sites, homeless shelters, transitional homes, food pantries, places like, church shelters and so forth. And we provide food to all of them. And then they are able to directly provide food to those who need it. And we have what's called a hunger hotline. So individuals are able to call or text, and they can enter their zip code and find the closest location where they can get food. And that's in place during the pandemic and outside of the pandemic. That's just something we do year round. We feed about 200,000 people through that network of community food sites. We also have a lot of programming with students. So we work with many school districts in the St. Louis metropolitan area. We have a child meal map where we have listed where families can find free food for their kids. And those outlets may be the schools themselves, or they may be places where we're providing food. But we just want for families to have options and have that information just readily accessible. So, in working with the schools, we're able to get food out to kids really year round. Again, outside of the pandemic, we have a program called Operation Backpack, where we provide food to children over the weekends throughout the school year. We have a summer meals program that provides food to children 18 and younger during the summer. And we have an after-school meal program, which really functions as a dinner for a lot of kids. So kids who are on free and reduced price lunches during the school year are able to get breakfast and lunch at school. We try to fill the gap over the weekend, in the evenings, and during the summer for those kids who might not get food outside of those school meals.
Right.
So,
thank you.
Sure.
How large is Operation Food Searcher team and so forth? Because my sense is people don't realize the scope of what you do.
Right. Yeah, we're in 30 counties in Missouri and Illinois, as well as the city of St. Louis. We have a very broad reach. A lot of people assume that food insecurity is an issue primarily in the city, and it is certainly an issue in the city, and the rates of food insecurity are higher in the city than in the outlying area. But food insecurity does not discriminate. It is everywhere. We're in all these different counties, extending, within about a 90-mile radius of St. Louis proper. So the need is widespread, our reach is widespread, and it's definitely we've been around for 40 years. Our goal, of course, is to get to the point where we don't need to be around. But the reality is it's an ongoing issue, and it's particularly heightened during the pandemic.
Bill?
Yeah, Kristen, how do you differentiate between the other food banks and food services? I know, I get pleas from the Salvation Army and from this food bank and that food bank, and it's difficult to know who one should give to. What do you guys do to differentiate from the others?
Well, I'd say that one thing, we're proud that we're an independent food bank. We are the largest provider of free food in the area. There are other organizations that charge for food. We do not charge for any food, whether it's through our agency program or through our various school programs. And that's one distinguishing factor. And another is that we partner with all sorts of organizations. So places that are distributing food, a lot of them are getting it from us. We collect and distribute about $33 million worth of food every year. And we've got partnerships with Schnucks, Deerbergs, Straub's, so the 3 local grocery partners. And we also partner with places like US Foods and Cisco. We work with area farmers, a lot of restaurants in the area. So we're working to gather all of this food so that we can then distribute to our various partners. Another thing that distinguishes us from others is that in addition to meeting the immediate need and providing food for those who need it now, we're really working on addressing the root causes of hunger. We have a whole nutrition education department that is designed to provide people with the skills they need to shop and prepare delicious and nutrient-rich meals on a budget. So we provide cooking classes, we provide nutrition education, grocery store tours, so that we're really equipping people with the skills that they need so that they can best utilize the food that they have access to. And if they use programs like SNAP or WIC, they can stretch those dollars the best way possible. We also have a policy and advocacy department. So we've got a team of policy workers who work with elected officials to inform them about the issues surrounding hunger and influence the types of benefits that are offered. They go to Jeff City every month during the legislative session, and they're really good at sharing with our partner organizations and with the people we serve any changes in policy. For instance, during the pandemic, the SNAP benefits were expanded and the WIC benefits were expanded. There was what was called pandemic EBT was given to families with school-age children, so they were eligible to receive more dollars to feed their kids. So it's really helpful to have that whole team that's shaping really the future of food policy in our state and ultimately across the country. So that's another way I would say we distinguish ourselves. We also have another ambition of the policy and advocacy team is to they already have created these programs that are considered food as medicine, with the ultimate goal of proving that food should be a reimbursable healthcare expense. So we work with pregnant women and we work with teenagers who have diabetes and who are food insecure. And we have basically in our 100 individual pilot with the pregnant women, we provided kitchen essentials, nutrition education, counseling, access to community resources, weekly food distributions. And the 100 women who've been enrolled in our program, of those who've already had their babies, we have had a preterm birth rate and a low birth weight rate that is 50% lower than Medicaid patients in the region. So we are proving that it's really effective. If you invest some money, time, support in these pregnant women, they don't require expensive NICU stays for their babies. The rate of infant mortality decreases. And so it's that type of program that we're working on that will hopefully have a huge impact on how people can be reimbursed and actually have food costs covered. So that's I'd say another way we can distinguish ourselves from other organizations that may be distributing food. We
Christine?
go well beyond that. Yes.
I think that, so many people hear about the fantastic work that your organization is doing, and yet they sit there and they think, well, how can I help? How can I get directly involved and connected with you? So could you kind of explain how people that, don't have an army behind them necessarily, but just as individuals, what can they do to help you? And also, is there a particular food item that you're always looking for?
Great questions. I'd say your second question, I will just mention that we definitely have some items that are needed more than others. We love foods that are high in nutrients and not empty calories, but high protein foods like canned tuna, canned chicken, peanut butter, a lot of shelf staples. Right now, with the Farmers to Family Food Box program, families are more easily able to access fresh produce, but the amount of non-perishable items is a little bit trickier. There seems to be more difficulty for people to access those foods. So when people do a food drive for us, which is one way they can help, we often ask for those shelf stable items that are great pantry staples that have a good shelf life and that can be used to prepare healthy meals. We definitely discourage things like ramen noodles, which seems to be a very popular item to donate, which we appreciate all donations, but there's really not a lot of health value in ramen noodles. And there's actually been a pretty high rate of kids burning themselves, pulling it out of the microwave. So we're not fans of ramen noodles. But as far as people helping, we welcome multiple ways for people to help. Certainly financial donations are really beneficial because while we get a lot of food donated, we also purchase a lot of food. We're forecast to spend about $800,000 on the food for our Operation Backpack program this year. So we certainly benefit from financial donations. We appreciate any donations of food. People can donate here at Operation Food Search. We're at 1644 Lotzie Boulevard in Overland. We have a food bin where people can make donations. We also welcome organizations of food drives. So whether it's if a family wants to organize a neighborhood food drive, they can do a porch drop-off type of a setup, or a lot of companies and religious entities and schools host food drives for us. So that's really helpful. Another way that people can help is to volunteer. Now, during the pandemic, we don't utilize as many volunteers as we typically do. We are using volunteers at our library partner sites where we're doing drive-through food distributions. So we have volunteers there. We have a few volunteers who are helping us with our food distribution in our warehouse. Once we are through this pandemic, hopefully not too long from now, we will welcome the large volume of volunteers that we typically really rely upon. We use volunteers to pack up the bags for the Operation Backpack program. Volunteers can sort through food that's received through food drives. And, so we're hoping to get back to that point, but we also have opportunities to help with our nutrition education department when they're back to teaching courses in schools and in community centers. So we typically have volunteer opportunities there as well. So,
Ms. Wild, right now, you mentioned some of the food distribution through the schools. Is it my imagination, or did I read recently that some schools are offering the food to all students in an attempt to reduce the stigma that might be attached to getting free food?
Yes, that is correct. There was a waiver put into place so that schools are able to offer the meals to everybody, whether they would normally qualify for free and reduced lunch during ordinary times or not. Anybody, no matter what their income level is eligible to pick up those meals for kids 18 and younger.
Alvin?
Kristen, in one of my 57 jobs, I have access to, which is very good food items, dry goods, like I said, canned food, things like that. They're past their expiration date. Now, for weeks, I was taking them someplace that then I guess took them to some food pantry. And then about a month or so ago, I was greeted with a sign that they no longer take expired items. Now, I was put off by that, all right? And I just don't know how I was supposed to react to that. Now, am I a jerk? Or is it, there are some pantries that take those items? Because there's a lot of them, and we are not the only business that does this. I know for a fact. What is the standard on that? Am I wrong?
It really depends on the food items. I mean, particularly if a food has been frozen, the expiration date does not as
these are non-refrigerated, non-frozen. Okay. These are all like dry good products.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if something is 10 years old, we would reject it. If it is a non-perishable item, a box of cereal or a can of peanut butter, and it's expired by 3 weeks, we would accept that. There's been a lot of recent media attention surrounding the fact that a lot of those expiration dates are artificially imposed, and it's possible that a food might not taste as good. Like in the situation of cereal, it may be a little bit stale past its expiration date, but it will not cause any illness. So we really look at it from the type of food that it is and the length of time that it's expired. So certainly there are some things that we would have to discard, but that's one thing that our volunteers do when they sort through food is they will look at expiration dates.
Right.
So Alvin, you can send that food our direction.
Hey, I'm taking you up on that because I think some of it is actually going to waste now, and that breaks my heart.
Yes.
I'm not going to repeat Alvin's question about am I a jerk because I don't want to hear it.
We can take a vote.
Yeah. I would never ask an open-ended question like that. I'm not as brave as Alvin. Is the public sector, without getting political about it, do you interface at all with the local and state governments? And if so, is there more that we could be doing in the way of public policy to help with the issue of food insecurity?
Yes, we definitely interact with the public sector. Our policy team is very connected with different elected officials, and certainly they voice their ideas and thoughts about ways that food-related policy can be more user-friendly. And as far as individuals, yes. I mean, I think we actually have a policy newsletter and a website and Twitter where we are often posting things to inform people about what they can do in order to reach out to an elected official or voice their opinion about, the expansion of SNAP benefits or things like that. So yes, and it's great because I think a lot of people, no matter what side of the aisle they typically fall on, people recognize across the board that food security is critical, and we can't have productive students and productive adults if people are hungry. And it's one of a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but it's feeding people is satisfying a basic need. And fortunately, there's a very good recognition from, like I said, individuals on both sides of the aisle and politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Bill?
Kristen, with the pandemic, having so many children staying at home doing virtual learning and not being able to access the meals at schools, How has that impacted your organization? What are you doing?
It's a great question. So a lot of schools at the end of March, when they closed down, a lot of schools quickly pivoted to provide meals to kids, either by sending meals out on their school bus routes or allowing students to come and pick up meals in a drive-through setup at the schools themselves. They've actually, I think some of them offered meals just one day a week, some offered multiple days a week. So it was very different depending on the school district. That's where our child meal map is really helpful, because someone can put in their zip code and they can find the school that's closest to them. They can find out what days the meals are provided, what the frequency is. And due to some waivers that were put in place, families can pick up multiple meals in a single visit. So it used to be the case that, a child would need to be present for the meal and they could only receive that meal type, breakfast or lunch. With these waivers in place, a parent can go and pick up a week's worth of meals for their children. And Operation Food Search has stepped in. We have we typically call our summer meals program. We actually kicked it off at the end of March this year, because for some families, the school wasn't accessible, or if there was a transportation issue or just physically where it was located, or perhaps the one day a week that the school was distributing meals didn't work out for the parents to pick up the meals. So Operation Food Search supplemented what the schools were doing by putting our summer meal program into place in late March. And we actually served more than 500,000 meals between late March and August. We were located at the beginning, we were at 10 locations, and we expanded. We were in over 40 locations over the course of the summer, where families, it was all, it was very safe. For a lot of locations, parents could drive through and pick up meals. We were located in St. Louis County Library branches, a few St. Louis City branches, St. Charles branches, as well as a lot of other community sites. We also had some locations where we would go to an apartment complex with our mobile meal vehicles, and we would set up for families to come and pick up food, socially distanced. They would come up and pick up their meals and return to their residence. So we were able to really fill in some of the gaps, especially this summer when most school districts didn't continue to serve meals throughout the summer. Some did, but a lot didn't. We fortunately have been, a waiver has been issued so that we can continue to operate our summer meal program even now that school has started. So we're crossing our fingers that waiver will continue to be extended as long as children are learning at home rather than at their schools.
Christine?
And sort of on the flip side of my original question, if there's an individual or family watching tonight even that is learning about your organization for the first time, how can they seek out your services and get help from you?
They can call our hunger hotline. They can, if they have access to a computer or phone, they can go to our website where they can enter in, they can look at our meal map. They can text or call to, like I mentioned, to find the closest location of one of our community food sites. And it will also tell them what the hours are, what the address is, a phone number they can call if they need to that site. And then they can also access our child meal map.
Well, I must ask you, as we conclude the program, we just have about a minute or so to go. Do you think that there's going to be a time when we're really going to solve this hunger issue in the greater St. Louis area? Or will this be something that your grandchildren and my grandchildren and their grandchildren will all be talking about?
Well, I certainly hope. It is our vision to eradicate hunger in the St. Louis region. One statistic that I heard recently that was a little bit discouraging was the fact that it took nearly a decade for food insecurity rates to reach pre-Great Recession rates. So after the Great Recession, it took 10 years to return to the levels before the Great Recession. So I know that food insecurity rates are going to remain high well beyond the time that the pandemic is with us. I certainly hope that by the time we're looking at generations down the road, we will have greatly decreased the amount of food security. Certainly, it's our goal to get it to zero. I'm not sure that's realistic, but we certainly want to decrease it as much as possible.
And once again, Kristen Wild, how can our viewers help your organization, Operation Food Search?
Please visit our website, operationfoodsearch.org. We've got lots of information about ways to get help and ways to give help. Follow us on social media, become our champions, spread the word. And I greatly appreciate all of the viewers and all of you for paying attention to this important issue.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the second half of Donnybrook. We really appreciate that. Kristen Wild, the Executive Director for Operation Food Search. That concludes this week's broadcast. Thank you so much for inviting us into your living rooms or onto your computer screens or your iPhones, wherever you are. We'll see you next week at this time or whenever you tune in.
Thank you.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.